about Azure Identity Management, and I have a very special guest today, the latest Cloud Community Champion, Shabaz Darr. Welcome, Shabaz. How are you?
I'm very, very well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. So, can you please introduce yourself, your community activities, your blog posts, and especially your new YouTube channel?
Yeah, of course, thank you very much. Yeah, so my name is Shabaz Darr. I'm a senior infrastructure consultant for a company called Net Company, based in the UK in Leeds, in the north of England. I do a bit around for the Microsoft community online. I have my Twitter handle, which is at Shabaz Darr, which I'm always posting on. I have a blog called IamITgeek.com. And I've also recently started a YouTube channel, again, called I Am IT Geek, which is going to be focusing on doing a series of videos. And they'll be kind of technical from beginner level. And as a series of each different topic go on, they'll get a bit more high level, and then going to how to configure certain aspects. The series at the moment is on multi-factor authentication. So there's a video released today on that, and over the next couple of weeks I'll be releasing more, explaining how to configure it and stuff like that. So trying to get aim for people who are just starting out in cloud, as well as people who know a bit more about it as well.
Okay, great. So I want to start from the basic question. What is identity management?
So I've actually got a presentation, which I'll go through. So there's so within Microsoft Azure, there's really three aspects that cover the identity management service. So the presentation I'm going to show you is going to be based around that. So we have Azure Active Directory, which is cloud-based identity management. We have more of a hybrid in the middle here, which involves both cloud and on-premises, and is a combination of both. And then we have Azure Active Directory Domain Services, which is again cloud-based, but it's essentially having a domain controller service in Microsoft Cloud in Azure. So we're going to go through each of these in a bit more detail. So I'll start off with Azure Active Directory. So this is the cloud-only version of identity management. So I'll explain what Azure Active Directory is in a few minutes. I'll go through some licensing requirements, and then just discuss some benefits like pros and cons around the Azure AD service. So the first question, like you said, what is identity management? What is Azure Active Directory? It's Microsoft's cloud-based identity management service, which integrates with services like Exchange Online, SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, just to name a few of the services. Like most cloud services, Azure Active Directory, or Azure AD for short, it has different levels and different features, and it's all dependent on your subscriptions that you have, or then you can assign those subscriptions to users. So another benefit of something within Azure Active Directory is you can secure Azure AD Cloud using multi-factor authentication as well. And it also has integration with Intune, which is MDM, mobile device management, where you can essentially assign policies to users and groups for compliance and configuration with Windows 10 enrolled devices. That's a little bit about Azure AD and an overview of it. So I mentioned licensing earlier for Azure Active Directory. There are 4 levels really of licensing. So there's the Azure AD Basic, which is free, and if you have any sort of subscription like Exchange Online, this license comes with that. It's part of that. And this provides user and group management, self-service password change for the cloud users, and also single sign-on capabilities for Azure, Office 365, and certain third-party SaaS apps. You can also integrate it with on-premises Active Directory, which I'll go into, which is more the hybrid element, which I'll go into in the hybrid section. The first license, which is a paid for license, which you have to purchase, is Azure Active Directory or AD Premium 1, which has all the same features and capabilities as the free version, but it has more support with the hybrid users. It has advanced administration, including dynamic groups, and also cloud password write back to on-premises. The most expensive of the Azure AD Premium licenses is Azure AD Premium 2. And that, again, has all the same features as Azure AD Premium 1, but also it offers identity protection to help provide risk-based conditional access to your applications and your critical company data. There is a fourth, which is I thought might be relevant, which is a pay-as-you-go feature license. So these are like additional feature licenses such as Active Directory Business to Customer or B2C. And what B2C does is it can help provide identity and access management solutions for your customers' applications, so your customer-facing applications. So just going to some of the benefits of Azure Active Directory.
Okay, may I have a question for you?
Oh yeah, of course, fire away.
Okay, so let's imagine I have an on-premise solution.
Yeah.
Active Directory on my data center. So why I need to use Azure Active Directory? So what is the pros and cons of users using Azure solutions?
Yeah. So when what you find is companies are going for more of a hybrid approach because there are certain services within Microsoft Cloud they want to utilize, like Office 365, Microsoft 365, SharePoint, OneDrive. And what you have is with Azure AD, it gives you that option to have one identity for each user. So rather than having an identity on premises, having an identity in Azure Cloud or Microsoft 365 Cloud, and users having to remember different passwords and logins, you can merge those two together or synchronize them. So again, in the hybrid section, I'll explain a little about how you synchronize those. So essentially, it means that users have a single sign-on. They only have to remember one set of credentials. They have one user object, and that is synchronized between both. And that's one of the benefits here that I'll discuss. So the other benefit about Azure Active Directory is it's highly available. So the design is spread across multiple data centers in different geographies. It consisted of independent building blocks to provide scale and availability. So that's something that, with an on-premises solution for most businesses, you can't compete with the resilience and high availability that Microsoft Cloud offers. Another benefit is the centralized administration of users through different locations. So if we talk about on-premises, if you have users in different countries, they tend to have a local domain controller because of latency. So with Azure Active Directory, you can have users from different locations all under one administration pane. So I mentioned single sign-on. So with one identity, you can access thousands of SaaS applications and on-premises applications using single sign-on. You can achieve it with your on-premises applications using pass-through authentication or federation, and I will discuss those shortly with a hybrid approach. And finally, the reporting. Azure AD provides rich security and activity reporting. And in my own experience, that's really difficult to get from Active Directory on-premises. You have like the activity event logs and stuff like that, but you get really, really good reporting within Azure AD. So some of the drawbacks, there's not many. So a few of the drawbacks is with Azure AD out of the box, without any further configuration, there is very minimal integration or no integration on premises for on-premises applications, unless they use SAML authentication. So if you do want to have that integration with on-premises, you need to do further configuration and you need further resources, which I'll discuss in the hybrid part coming up shortly.
Okay.
And the other sort of negative I feel is that there's a massive reliance on Microsoft 365. So any sort of outages with Microsoft Cloud can cause a lot of issues. I think it was only a few weeks ago where we had an outage to Azure AD, and users, a lot of businesses and users were helpless and couldn't use any applications. So that's quite a big reliance. So, yeah, are you okay? Do you have any further questions, or shall I just move on to the hybrid element?
Yeah, sure. You can go.
So yeah, the hybrid identity management is the second sort of identity management I feel is part of Microsoft and Azure Cloud. Hybrid identity is where you have Active Directory domain on premises, and then you have on a Windows server, and then you have Azure AD in the cloud, and you use a tool called Azure AD Sync to synchronize both of those objects, and that's installed on your on-premises domain controller. So as I mentioned, you have an object on premises and you synchronize that to Microsoft Azure or Azure AD. So they have a single account in both areas. There's three main ways in which you can set up hybrid identity, and they're all done via the Azure AD Sync tool. So the first one is password hash. Then you have so what I'll do is, sorry, I will in this next phase, I'll discuss password hash. I'll discuss pros and cons around password hash. I'll discuss pass-through authentication, and again, some of the pros and cons around that. And the final piece will be the federated ADFS hybrid piece, and I'll just go through some pros and cons with that as well. So with password hash, how does it work? That's the first real question I'm sure you want to know. So essentially, Azure AD Connect, the tool that we use to do the synchronization, it synchronizes a hash of the user's password from on-premises Active Directory instance to the cloud-based Azure AD instance. So Active Directory on premises stores passwords in the form of a hash value representation. So to synchronize your password, Azure AD Connect syncs the extracts of your password hash from on-premises to Azure AD. Passwords synchronize on a per user basis and in chronological order, so from A to Z essentially. Extra security processing is applied to your password hash before it's synchronized to Azure AD, the authentication service. So it's to make sure the sync is encrypted. Just some quick pros and cons around password hash. It scales and it's resilient since it is all native to Azure AD. There's no other reliance during the authentication or anything else. It provides breach and replay protection, so there's got good security. And reports of leaked credentials, since stored hash can be used to compare against credentials found on the dark web. So some of the drawbacks, the main drawback I feel is that it's got a bit of a backdoor. So if Active Directory account has been locked during restricted hours, and if you've got a policy called restricted hours set, or if your password's expired, it will not impact your ability to log onto Azure AD. So for that example, I mean, if your Active Directory on premises account is locked, then you can still log into Azure AD for the cloud. It doesn't update the cloud object if you're using password hash.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a backdoor security flaw. So I personally tend not to use password hash as much. Second one I want to talk about. Sorry, Bob.
Before continue, I want to ask a question about the password policies. For example, I have a weak password policy on my on-premise solution. If I try to sync with cloud, is there a possibility to
There is.
any security
So
risks or alerts?
if that's a requirement of yours as a business, if you want to use your password and security policies from on premises with your cloud identity, then you need to use ADFS. And that's you're jumping the gun. You're asking. I'm going to answer all these questions, but no. But yeah, I'll explain that in the ADFS bits shortly. But
Okay.
yeah, it's a really good question, and you can do that with ADFS. That's exactly the use case it's for.
Okay.
So with pass-through authentication or PTA, it allows users to sign into both on-premises and cloud-based applications using the same password. And you can combine pass-through authentication with single sign-on features. So when users are accessing applications, their corporate machines inside the network, they do not need to type their passwords. So if you've got using Outlook, for example, and you're using pass-through authentication, you don't need to keep on typing your Outlook password every hour or whatever. It remembers it. And the pass-through authentication does that single sign-on piece, which sometimes you don't get with the password hash. So just some pros and cons around pass-through authentication. So again, as with the password hash, the cloud resilience, again, since it's all native to Azure AD, it's lighter than Federation as well. So you get similar, not all, but you get similar services and similar benefits as with ADFS, but it's a lighter version of it.
And I have a question.
Yep.
The only Federation is I know from Star Trek. So what's the Federation means?
Federation is essentially like a partnership between two domains as such. So you could say, so you've got domain A and domain B, and you create a federated trust between two domains essentially. So even though you're doing this sync between, or you're doing this federated trust between your on-premises and your cloud, and they look like they're the same domain, they're technically not. So that federation is doing the trust between the two domains, your on-premises and your cloud. I mean, you can have federated trust with just on-premises to on-premises, so to customers, to partners, or to clients wanting to have that federation trust. So, for example, a user from client B wants to have access to resources and data from client A. You would do that federated trust, and you can have different types of trust as well. There's a two-way trust, one-way trust, transient trust. Was that okay? So that's a little outside the scope of the Azure and ADFS sort of configuration, but yeah, that is one thing ADFS can be used for.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So one of the other benefits are the backdoor that I mentioned with password hash is enforced here. So the restrictions are enforced. So if you do have a password lockout, it updates your from on-premises to your cloud identity. So one of the major negatives around it is it supports legacy authentication, which is obviously now, especially in this day and age with OAuth and modern authentication, is a bit of a drawback. So the final bit, which obviously we were speaking about Federation earlier. So the Federated ADFS is the other final hybrid approach to identity management in Azure. So it's a collection of domains that have established a trust, as I mentioned before. The level of trust may vary, however, but typically includes authentication and almost always includes authorization. You can federate your own premises environment with Azure AD, and you can use federation for authentication and authorization. The sign-in method ensures that all users' authentication occurs on premises, so it is quite key. Your on-premises solution, or on-premises Azure AD, and your ADFS servers that you have on premises are quite crucial here because they do all the authentication. And also this method allows administrators to implement more rigorous levels of access control. So we mentioned the password policies and all the sort of different sort of security policies you have on premises. You can enforce those on your cloud identity objects as well within Azure AD. So just finally, I want to discuss the pros and cons of Federation. So just some of the pros. It's got a good third-party multi-factor authentication support. So this is so we're not talking about Microsoft MFA or Azure MFA here. We're talking about other MFA products. ADFS has good support for those. It's certification-based authentication, so it's very secure. Some of the drawbacks, it requires a large amount of infrastructure. So like I mentioned, you need an ADFS server, you need an ADFS proxy server, and obviously if you want a resilience, you need more of those. You'll need an ADFS farm, a proxy farm. So it can add up to quite a bit of a resource footprint on premises. It requires firewall exceptions as well. So again, it's just more management overhead. And because of it being on premises, it's limited scalability. And again, the more scalability you want, the more it's going to cost. So it's sometimes not sustainable. So are you okay? Any questions around that?
No, I'm okay.
Excellent. So the final identity management aspect I want to talk about within Azure and Microsoft 365 is Azure Active Directory domain services. So this is probably the latest identity management service from Microsoft. So in this quick section, I'm just going to go through some details of Azure Active Directory domain services or Azure AD DS. I'll explain what it is, how it works, and I'll just go through some of the features. So the what, first of all, what is Azure AD DS? So Azure Active Directory Domain Services provides managed domain services such as domain join, group policy, lightweight Active Directory access protocol, so LDAP, and it also provides Kerberos and NTLM authentication. So these are the same sort of features that are available in an on-premises domain controller or even a domain controller in Azure as a VM. But the main difference is this is a service. So you can use the domain services without the need to deploy, manage, or patch a domain controller. So it's a service. It's like a SaaS product almost.
Can you tell me about the difference between Kerberos and NTLM?
Off the top of my head, I can't. I'm afraid they're different authentication protocols within Active Directory. I'm afraid I can't. It's quite bad, I know, but I don't know the difference off the top of my head, I'm afraid.
Okay. Are there any other types or just this two one?
I think there's basic. There's basic authentication, NTLM authentication, Kerberos authentication. I think there's Windows authentication as well. But with Active Directory domain services, you get the Kerberos and NTLM authentication, which is the ones you get on premises.
Okay.
Just explain the how it works. So to provide identity services, Azure basically creates an Active Directory domain service managed domain on your virtual network of your choice. So if you have a VNet, you deploy a VNet within Azure, you deploy the Azure AD DS service or managed domain to that VNet. So Azure AD integrates with your existing Azure AD tenant. This integration lets users sign into service and applications connected to your managed domain using their existing credentials. So you have to have Azure AD already. And then when you add the Azure AD domain services tenant, it synchronizes the passwords. So you can use existing groups, user accounts. These features provide a smooth lift and shift of on-premises resources to Azure as well. One of the key things is that when you do provision your Azure AD domain services, you have to, or your users have to change their Azure AD passwords for it to synchronize. Otherwise, if they don't change, then they can't access any resources that are managed by the Azure AD domain services tenant. So let's quickly touch on some of the features. So we mentioned domain join. So unlike Azure AD, you can join Windows devices. So that's Windows VM servers 2019, 2016, and Windows 10 as well. You can join those to the Azure AD DS domain, whereas with Azure AD, you can't join those because it's password hash. So this would need to be on the V. So these VMs would need to be on the VNet, or if you have on-premises infrastructure, they would have to have a site-to-site VPN to your Azure VNet, where the Azure AD domain services is hosted. Does that make sense?
Yeah. May I use macOS or Linux just for Windows?
As long as if you can domain join it, then you can use it. So sorry, yeah. So Linux would be possible because you can domain join Linux, I believe. Is that right?
I am not sure. I think we can join macOS.
Yeah, any operating systems you can join to an on-premises domain, you would be able to join to the Azure AD DS domain. Again, as long as it was either on the same network or has a connection to that network where the Azure AD domain services is hosted, so a VPN or within Azure.
Okay.
One of the other features is highly available, like everything else in Microsoft Cloud. Azure AD DS includes multiple domain controllers in the back end, which you don't even see. So they provide high availability for your managed domain. And this guarantees service uptime and resilience to failures. Another feature is the integration with Azure AD that I mentioned. So user accounts, group memberships, and credentials are automatically available from your Azure AD tenant. New users, groups, or changes to attributes from your Azure AD tenant or your on-premises AD environment are automatically synchronized to Azure AD domain services. One of the final features we touched on earlier was Kerberos and NTLM. So with the support of NTLM and Kerberos authentication, you can deploy applications that rely on Windows integrated authentication. So that is my short presentation around identity management in Azure. So we've covered the Azure AD, we've covered the hybrid approach, and then we've covered Azure AD domain services.
Okay, so I'm a developer, and I must ask this question.
Okay.
When I see services, I think the APIs, of course.
Yep.
So, is there any APIs for integrated custom applications?
So yeah, so Azure AD is the would be where you'd integrate those, and you have something called, again, I think you need one of the paid for Azure AD licenses, but you can have application proxy within Azure AD with the paid for feature. I think it's Azure AD Premium 1, and you can configure application proxy to work with APIs on premises, hosted on premises, or hosted in third party vendors. So yeah, application proxy is what you would use for that in Azure AD.
Okay, thank you. And what about the MFA? Because most of the users don't want to use MFA. And is it required or optional?
It's optional. They've not made it a requirement yet, but it's optional and highly recommended. What you find is with Microsoft 365, they have what they call a security score. and that basically tells you as the customer or the client what the vulnerabilities are within your tenancy. And MFA is always top of the list. If you don't have multi-factor authentication enabled and your users having to use it, then you've got a lot of high risk and you have a very low score. So it's a massive benefit is multi-factor authentication. Definitely, it's however it's not a requirement yet, but definitely recommended.
Okay, thank you. And I want to ask you a question, but I am not sure it is related to this topic.
Ask away anyway. Doesn't matter. Ask away anyway.
I am not very familiar with the system stuff, so sorry about that. For example, when I'm signing to Microsoft Teams, it's asking me for signing on this device, or it is make my machine to join to Azure AD. And is it okay to use this option? For example, I am using a different account from my domain, and I clicked yes, sign in this machine. Is it going to use my machine to join that domain also and drop my existing domain?
So you're saying you're trying to log into a different type of device with your Microsoft 365 account? Is that what you're saying there?
I am using my corporate machine, and I'm trying to sign in with a different Teams account. This belongs to another Active Directory, not my company.
Okay. I see. So you're right. Okay. It is. I believe it is. So it depends. It depends on your access policies within your tenancy. So there is a way to lock that down. So you can, on your corporate device, you can only log into your Teams account. But that's a conditional. That would be a conditional access policy, which is to do with identity management. So it is related to the topic.
Okay.
So that'd be depending on the conditional access policies your business has. If you don't have any and you don't restrict that, technically yes, you would be able to log into so you're logged into your Windows 10 device, your corporate device with your 365 credentials, but you want to log into Teams with my credentials. And out of the box, without any security policies, that is possible. But then you can also lock that down or restrict that using conditional access policies as well.
Okay, and will it drop my machine from my corporate domain, or it still exists in my corporate domain if I log into another Teams account?
Yeah, your device, your machine will still stay logged in and will still be joined to the domain. Again, there are different types of domain join as well within identity management. So with device management, you can either have a enrolled, so you can have on-premises domain joined, a hybrid device. So it's joined to the on-premises Active Directory, but it's also enrolled into Azure AD. Or the third type is just a cloud only, so it's only enrolled. It's not part of your on-premises domain. So in my experience, a lot of customers have started going to the hybrid one. So it's enrolled with Azure Active Directory, but it's also domain joined. And what that allows you to do is get the best of both worlds. You can utilize group policy, but at the same time, you can utilize the integration with things like Intune and all that good stuff. So yeah, to answer your question, you would not, it wouldn't remove your machine from the domain if you tried to do that. But again, it's all dependent on the conditional access policies that you have set.
Okay, so it is okay, and there is no harm doing that. I am correct?
Yeah. There's no harm in doing that at all, if it's allowed by your security policies.
Okay, and thank you very much, Shabaz. Do you have any final words?
No, again, it was very PowerPointy what I went through today. I will be doing a series of videos based on identity management. That's going to be my second series, and I will be going more into the demos in the videos as well. So I'll be going into how to configure Azure Active Directory, a hybrid, ADFS, all that sort of stuff. The Azure AD Connect Sync tool, and also Active Directory domain services, and it'll be all on the video series. So hopefully that'll be out in a couple of weeks' time, maybe next month.
Okay, hopefully we will meet in a new episode with more demos instead of the presentation.
Yeah, I'll think of another topic where I can do some demos for you. Definitely, I'd love to come back on. I really enjoy the show. Thank you for having me again.
Okay, thank you very much, and see you soon then.
Okay, take care. Bye bye.
Okay, bye. Cheers.